The National Endowment for Liberty presents At Issue, the in-depth forum on freedom in America today. Hello, I'm Michael Hayes. The host of At Issue is the physician, author, and former member of Congress, Ron Paul. Ron?
Thank you, Mike. Our topic for this edition of At Issue is the crisis in primary and secondary education in America today. We'll be looking at it from the standpoint of the choices parents have or don't have in how their children are educated.
Our program, as always, will consist of our probe report on what's at issue, reactions from a group of randomly selected citizens somewhere in the country, and an analysis of the entire subject by a knowledgeable panel of experts. We'll begin our probe report, Crisis in Learning, following this brief message.
This is one in a series of programs that takes a fresh look at critical issues affecting how you live and how you use your natural rights as an individual to make decisions about your life. At Issue is brought to you by the National Endowment for Liberty because we agree with Thomas Jefferson that government governs best that governs least. The National Endowment for Liberty is a nonprofit, nonpartisan educational project. We do not accept state or federal funds. In fact, we don't count on any agency of government at any level to keep this program on the air. Instead, we count on the generous gifts of individuals, people just like you. Write to us at Post Office Box 580099, Houston, Texas 77058, or call us at 1-800-333-3545 and ask for extension 909. If you missed any part of this message, keep your pencil and paper handy. This information will be repeated.
Intuitively, viscerally, Americans know their education system is not working, and time is running out. On the surface, things might look fine, but they're not. Nearly 20% of adult Americans are functionally illiterate, unable to read signs, labels, forms. Virtually all of these people have a grammar school education, yet they know no grammar. Most have a high school diploma, which they cannot read.
700,000 kids drop out of school every year. Another 700,000 kids graduate with a degree in their hand, and they can't read it. 700,000 children graduate from American high schools every year with a diploma, and they are unable to read at the 9th grade level. Now, they just aren't going to be able to hold the kinds of jobs that are being created. That's a tragedy for them. It's a disaster for the country.
Once we thought our American schools were the best anywhere. Now we know otherwise. And this at a time when international economic competition is more vigorous than ever.
We can't compete with anybody in the world if we don't have an educated workforce. And our kids are not getting an adequate education to prepare them for the kinds of jobs that are being created in this country and around the world today. We're not in the old world where you could always work digging ditches or get some sort of a manual job. The minimum wage jobs are drying up in this country because low-skilled jobs are drying up.
Although the performance of students on standard achievement tests has stabilized after a decades-long decline, student performance remains far below the levels of 15 or 20 years ago. What accounts for this disappointing performance? Some say we're teaching the wrong subjects, wasting time on frivolous classes. They say, let's get back to basics. Some would lay blame on the radicalized teachers' unions, which often seem concerned about everything but quality education. Others cite an even more frightening problem.
For the first time, we truly have a bona fide threat, a threat to life and limb in schools. And it isn't so much the school's fault as it is the fact that those who are engaged in the trafficking of crack cocaine are now utilizing younger and younger kids as bearers of the drugs in various roles. And therefore, the kids think they're going to be smarter sometimes than the dealers are, and they think they're going to rip them off. And when they try that, of course, then the dealer has to protect his turf, and so then he seeks out retribution. And very often the only place you know where the kid goes is to school, and then therefore the school becomes the site.
In America, we spend more on education in total and per capita than any other country. Education spending has gone up and up, even as performance has gone down and down. School spending problems vex every state legislator.
There's no question about it. In Montana, for example, the amount spent on education is the largest single amount spent on any governmental activity. Education is by far the winner.
It's true in all states. But court-mandated equalization formulas mean some districts can't spend as much as they want.
I know. Equalization really is contrary to our whole concept of local control and the ability to spend what we want to educate our children in our communities, to make those decisions at the local level. And when the state becomes involved in that decision, there's a real question. Is this really in the best interest of education to put limitations on the amount that a local community can do for its own children?
More involvement by parents is seen as critical by just about everyone.
I think we gave parents a clear message, and even teachers, no help wanted in the last couple of 3 decades. That was the wrong message. It can't be just the fact that the parents make a demand for a better school and then turn the whole responsibility over to the education community. That's not going to work.
There's really no magic. The thing that was alluded to in terms of smallness, intimacy, resourcefulness, parental involvement, no magic, just doing a few basic things and getting all of the people who have a vested interest to buy into it. Choice creates that opportunity.
Bonin is number 13.
When parents are given a choice, they seem to take it seriously. These parents, overnight gear in hand, lined up days in advance for the chance to enroll their children in a so-called magnet school.
What those schools show is that even when you have an outstanding public school, and of course there are some, the school does not expand to meet the increased demand. In other words, it's a system failure. If it were a private company that ran the school, and the school was very successful, the school would expand and to accommodate the way the increase in the number of clients, the way any other private enterprise would do. But with public schools, even if you have an outstanding school, you still have to ration it.
Another means of increasing parental choice is called the voucher system.
A voucher is basically an entitlement that a parent could use to pay for his child's education at a school of the parent's choice. In a very rough way, the vouchers would be analogous to food stamps. You can take the stamps to a store, and the store will give you credit when you buy the food. In the case of educational vouchers, the parent could take the voucher and apply it to a cost of education.
In Kansas City, a suit by black parents has made national news. Their children are shut out of the public magnet schools because letting them in would upset the racial quotas. They seek a voucher system which will allow them to attend area private schools which have agreed to accept them.
I hope that this lawsuit now, we can get a better education for our children.
Increasing opportunity for children to attend private schools worries many, who fear the public schools will decline still further as a result. But others feel the competition will in fact strengthen public schools.
It would help public education. It really would help, because what it would say that, you know, if you're going to do a good job, then, you know, you will be around. If you're not doing a good job, you shouldn't be around anyway.
I love the fact that we got private schools, and it's great, but that isn't our national concern. Our national concern is to give every child the maximum opportunity that we can, and that means public schools. And to give public schools the chance to work, you've got to give them greater authority and responsibility and control where it counts, in the classroom, in the school.
I would say that no solution to our most important educational problems is possible without greater involvement of the for-profit sector in education. That involvement might be through schools, it might be through providing services by contracting out with private contractors under competitive conditions. It might be through homeschooling. It might be through various other ways of providing the services. But if we don't get the for-profit sector much more actively involved in providing educational services, I think these other changes are going to continue to be what they have been. They're cosmetic changes that really mean nothing in the long run.
That there is a crisis in learning, few doubt. Sincere people disagree on the best course of action, but the new focus on greater parental responsibility and choice may indicate both the urgency of the problem and the road to its solution.
Remember when life was simpler and problems were solvable? When you could rely on good common sense and your own honesty and initiative to see you through? That was back before government regulation got so tangled up in our public and private lives, before paperwork and arbitrary rules took over and individual choice was locked out. The National Endowment for Liberty believes that most of our problems cannot be solved by government, that too much government is in itself a problem, not a solution. These programs are made possible as a public service by people who believe that moral and political rights go hand in hand with economic freedom. Write to us at Post Office Box 580099, Houston, Texas 77058, or call us at 1-800-333-3545 and ask for extension 909. We are the National Endowment for Liberty. Liberty can set you free.
All I can say is my father probably went to the 8th grade, okay? But when my father went to the 8th grade, he knew geometry. He knew algebra.
Each week on At Issue, we show the probe report you've just seen to a randomly selected group of citizens somewhere in the United States. What you're watching now is actual footage of the unrehearsed reactions of a group of people in Baltimore, Maryland, to the probe report, Crisis in Learning.
The kids are good, just like you see films, decent everyday kids. But they're being shortchanged by the public school bureaucracy.
I can remember taking sausage and all to school to the teacher because it was close, it was a relationship. Now you have a teacher, you see it, next year she's gone. They really don't get to know them, as you say, when they, now in Baltimore County, they've changed the boundaries again. You'll be going to another school because it's too many in this area. And the children are frightened.
And get rid of the classes that don't really mean anything. I mean, like in high school, I had like jewelry making. I mean, it's like, it's a joke, you know? I mean, what are you going to do with jewelry making?
It boils down to the parents. I would have to say I would just push for parent involvement.
Because a lot of parents are not going to care no matter what. Because it's just that they just happen to have kids at a school age, and if they go to school, fine, and you know, some of the parents are getting in trouble themselves anyway.
You're not going to have a great deal of choice when we align our counties and our districts along geographical areas, which we do.
I live in Harford County, and that's one of the reasons we moved up there, because the school system is so wonderful.
I have 3 children, so you know, they all have to be equal to what their friends wear, and this is Catholic schools. You know, they have the uniforms during the day.
Your children go to Catholic schools?
I've always thought it was great with the Catholic schools. I just think it's great, and a lot better than the city schools, I think. That's just my opinion.
I agree that the choice has been taken out of the parents' hands.
You agree that choice has been taken out of the parents' hands?
I would be among the ones that camped out.
If indeed they believe that the voucher system helps parents, and you can apply that voucher to public or private, simply pass the damn bill that they talked about for the last 10 years, and that is if you choose to send your kid to a private school, whether it be a religious denomination school or whatever, you get a tax credit on your tax return. Dr. Lieberman is talking about the profit motive. Right. There's 2 sides to that coin. That school, just like a company, is driven now to minimize its costs.
Anytime you have competition amongst anything, I don't care if it's in the animal world or it's in our world, you have competition, you create excellence.
Those are fascinating reactions. Now we're going to hear from our At Issue panel of experts. Jack Plank is Special Advisor to the U.S. Secretary of Education and is in charge of the Secretary's initiative on choice. Joan Davis Rattray is President of the Institute for Independent Education. And our host and regular panelist is the Chairman of the Endowment for Liberty, Ron Paul.
Thank you, Mike. And thank you, Jack and Joan, for joining us today. Jack, I'd like to start off by asking you the first question. What is the administration's position on choice?
Well, Dr. Paul, President Bush believes that we need a new wave of education reform. We can't ignore the problems that we have. And we can't depend on our old solutions, which are not working. We have new statistics which have just come out that show that we're spending over $350 billion this year on our educational system. And when an awful lot of our kids, as the President say, cannot identify the United States on a map of the world, then it's time to map out a new system of education. So the President has been calling upon the country to look at choice as a way of restructuring our schools, involving our parents, motivating our educators, and bringing about some of the exciting results that we've seen in places like East Harlem, New York. State and local educators spend 94% of our nation's education budget. So that's where the changes are going to have to occur. And the President and the Secretary of Education are calling upon those state and local officials to look at choice and make changes.
What is the actual position that the administration take include choices outside the monopoly public school system, or is it only going to be in this one school system that we have today?
For right now, the President is calling upon us to have more choice of public schools. But the President would also like for local and state officials to consider how they can offer more choices that would involve private schools as well. So the vision is that we would have as much choice as possible, but the administration is taking it one step at a time. And our primary focus for right now is going to be on public school choice. But the President believes that children should be allowed to choose from as wide a variety of providers as possible.
Joan, in trying to help the inner city minority students, do you anticipate that the help will have to come through the public school system, or do you think that we have to incorporate some private alternatives as well?
Well, I think there's an old African proverb that says that you shouldn't test the water with both feet. And I think that, especially for inner city schools, we cannot rely on the public schools. We have to have a wide range of both public and private choices, and really support those schools that work for students wherever they may be. And it's at this level, in terms of the inner city schools, where we should have that the wide range of options. These are the children that are most in trouble in terms of poor school environments, a lot of poverty, a great deal of chaos in their environments. So we need to really look at the situation in terms of what works wherever we find it.
Have we seen any schools popping up in any of the big cities of this country so far?
Yes, we have. The Institute for Independent Education has identified over 400 in about 4.5 years.
And these are in minority areas?
These are run by minorities, in minority areas, in urban settings where some of the worst schools are. Parents are looking for some relief.
Without tax credits or anything, they're doing that?
Without tax credit, but a lot of work, hard work on parents' part. Many parents are working 1 and 2 jobs. Churches are helping. Very little foundation work, very little business involvement, but the people, the community, are taking the educational destiny in their own hands.
Do you have any idea what they're spending per student on average? Because I think nationally we're spending $5,000 per student in public education.
Yes, we have found through a study that we have done that the average is about $2,000, a little less with church-affiliated schools. We're talking about schools that are using half the resources, but are trying to do better. Now, I'm not saying that these schools are a panacea, nor that they don't need additional funds and resources, but they are trying to keep the environment stable. They're trying to develop basic skills in the children, and they're trying to put them on the right track so that they can make better use of the public system.
Jack, you know, it's often been said we can't have tax credits, we can't have voucher, it will only help the rich. Isn't this an indication that if we did have a voucher system or a tax credit system, that there are a lot of people in the minority class and in the poor class who would benefit from this?
Well, certainly those are educational choices, I think, that our policymakers have to look at a whole lot better. Many studies have shown that private schools operate very economically, and they are able to draw in parents as a resource. Sometimes we think of only dollars and cents as being resources, but our real resources are ourselves, students and teachers and parents. So private schools are able to take advantage of that, and certainly there needs to be a lot more encouragement for these institutions so that they don't get put out of business. And our public opinion polls show that minority families, in particular, even more than white, middle, and upper income white families, that minority parents strongly support the right to have these kinds of choices. So it's definitely something that our state and local policymakers need to be thinking about.
You know, in the introduction, Dr. Lieberman suggested that vouchers were similar to food stamp, and that you could take the voucher and go buy your education or take your food stamp. You know, do you really think that's accurate? If food stamps is using somebody else's money, where a voucher or a tax credit is really only getting your own money back and getting a chance to make a choice on which education option you want. Do you think this is a fair analysis?
I don't like the analogy. Food stamps is an analogy that you're trying to relate giving somebody something who in dire need. I think that if we take our cue from the parents who have already done something about it, they are models in a community where they find very few models. If you look at it in terms of parents are standing up, trying to develop an environment.
Jen, can we hold that thought for just a moment?
Certainly.
We're going to have to take a quick break. So we'll return to more views and comments on the subject at issue in just a moment.
Throughout this series of programs, you will see ideas examined that affect every part of your life. We'll look at issues from a new angle, not from the left or the right, but from the perspective of individual liberty and responsibility. We believe our founding fathers were right. We are endowed by the Creator with certain inalienable rights, and among these is the right to life, liberty, and property. We do not accept your money transferred through state or federal government agencies. Instead, this series is funded by direct voluntary gifts from individuals. We are the National Endowment for Liberty. Call us right now, 1-800-333-3545, extension 909. For a transcript of this program, specify the subject and send $5 in a stamped self-addressed envelope to P.O. Box 580099, Houston, Texas 77058. The National Endowment for Liberty, providing information on America's most precious resource, individual freedom.
Welcome back, and back to Joan Rattray with that thought.
Yes, I was just saying that we should support those parents who are finding their own way, complement those actions, and if it means getting back some of their tax money that's not being used effectively in the first place, then I think all the more that we should do that.
You know, this raises the question on how many options can we give them? Can we give them just the average private school that we're talking about, or would we include homeschooling? You know, there's a lot of people, probably in the millions now, of kids that are attending private education in their homes. Would you be adverse to allowing homeschooling as well as the private schools?
I'm not adverse to anything where parents take a commanding control over the education of their children. I believe that we need to create learning zones, and in part of that learning zone, the home is the first place, and if it wants to continue through several years of a child's growing up, then that place should be.
You know, I really think you touched on the key to it. Who's in charge? Is it the government is going to distribute the education and educate the kids, or is it going to be the parents to take the responsibility? You know, one other subject I think is a hot subject in education. I'll ask both of you to comment on this, and this is the discipline in school. Why is it, do you think, that when we look at the discipline in a private school, they don't have problems? If you look at the public school, you have a rare Joe Clark that seems to be able to maintain order, and he has to do it with a baseball bat. But the average private school is disciplined, and they generally have very little, if any, problem with drugs. So I think there has to be a message there that we ought to look into.
Well, Dr. Paul, we actually have research on what makes those schools effective. And the common feature to those private schools is that they have a sense of community. Parents tend to know other parents in those Catholic parochial schools. Kids know that their parents know each other, and the kids know that their parents know the teachers and the administrators. So what we need to come back to for all of our schools is a greater sense of community and cohesiveness. And the only way that can occur is by first providing distinctive schools, and second, allowing parents to choose from among those distinctive schools. And that can really do an awful lot to increase the safety of our schools for our students.
But the question really is, can this be achieved through centralized planning or a government program? You say that they have cohesiveness, but it's all been done voluntarily.
Jack?
So maybe any mandated
Ron?
program won't work.
Our time's running short. Maybe Jack can respond to that as we get into our wind-up. We do need to wind this up, and the way we like to do that is by focusing on the next step. So, Joan Rattray, very precisely and very briefly, what is the next step? What's the first thing we ought to do to get us back on the right track in education?
I believe we should increase the incentives, whether they're economic or moral support, on those schools that work, whether they're in the public or private sector, thereby creating competition and improvement among all schools. And parents are the primary players in that.
Thank you. And Jack Plank, what's your feeling? What's the next step we ought to take to improve education?
Mike, it's time for a new wave of education reform. We can deny that we have a problem, or we can deal with the problem. And we can deal with the problem in the old way, which is not working, which is centralized planning, trying to make all schools be the same for all children, when we know that that won't work. The other thing that we can do is to try a solution that allows, on the one hand, for educators working with parents to create distinctive schools that would come up with distinctive solutions for kids and families who are different.
Thank you, Jack. And Ron Paul, finally, what's your view?
I think the sooner we allow the parents to spend their money the way they want on education, the better, and the sooner we'll solve our problems. We have to do that by decentralizing the control of education. I don't believe the federal government has any right whatsoever to be in education. It ought to be handled locally or in private means. The best method to do this right now is through a tax credit.
I want to thank our panelists, and I want to thank you for watching. We'll be back next week with another vital topic at issue.
The National Endowment for Liberty would like to acknowledge the inspirational contribution of Brenda B. Bretan and the sponsors of At Issue, whose generous support makes these programs possible.